Hello and welcome back to Born to Rant. I'm Brandon, and this week we are here to talk about a movie that I legitimately believe epitomizes the term 90s cool to its very core. One of the fastest turnarounds a character has ever had from introduction to starring in their own movie, and the movie that gave us John Leguizamo as That's right, we're diving into 1997's Spawn, directed by Mark A.Z. and starring Michael Jai White, John Leguizamo, and Martin Sheen. We'll look at the origins of the character, the production process of the movie, everything that makes the movie still worth watching, and its legacy almost 30 years later. So before we go any further, I feel like I have to admit something kind of embarrassing. When I was watching this movie to cover it for this video, about halfway through, I realized I had never seen Spawn from beginning to end before. I knew the setup of the story, but somehow I'd never gotten much further in the movie than Al showing up to Cyan's birthday party. And I gotta admit, this movie was quite a bit better than I was expecting, although it is an absolutely insane movie. John Leguizamo's performance alone is something worth studying as a masterclass in creating a disgusting character. It's also really clear when watching it now that the director was way more interested in the special effects aspect of the movie than he was with the story, which is how we get terrible ADR lines over blurry flashback footage like this.
I'll always love you. Forever.
There's also the really fun scenes with Nicol Williamson's Cagliostro, who trains up Spawn and also narrates the movie with this super over-the-top voiceover.
The battle between heaven and hell has waged eternal. Their armies fueled by souls harvested on earth.
And honestly, even though quite a bit of the CGI is pretty dated at this point, I legitimately believe a lot of it still holds up today. Plus, this movie was really kind of ahead of the times with the things it was trying to pull off special effects wise. Some of it works, like Spawn blending into the building here, and some of it doesn't, like when he lands in the ballroom sequence and his cape literally turns into a poorly rendered PS1 graphic. But before I start diving deep into the movie, let's actually take a step back and learn a little bit more about how the movie came to be, because honestly, it's just as much fun to talk about the production of the movie as it is the movie itself. And it all begins in 1992 with Todd McFarlane, Rob Liefeld, and Jim Lee leaving Marvel Comics to start their own company, Image Comics, and McFarlane launching his creator-owned title, Spawn, and the first issue alone would go on to sell well over 1.5 million copies, and pretty quickly there was interest in turning Spawn into a movie. McFarlane actually turned down a deal with Columbia Pictures in '92 because he felt their offer didn't grant him enough creative control. So he would hold out until New Line Cinema came calling, and he actually sold them the rights for just $1 in exchange for greater creative input and merchandising rights. Because everyone knew that this would end up being an effects-heavy movie, the studio looked to 3 Industrial Light and Magic employees who just recently launched their own production studio called Pull Down Your Pants Production, which was ran by director Mark A.Z., producer Clint Goldman, and ILM bad boy / special effects supervisor Steve Spaz Williams. So needless to say, Deep was a special effects guy through and through, which I think makes the final cut of this movie make just a little more sense, but more on that in a moment. As for the script, the team looked to Alan B. McElroy, who actually had written several issues of the Spawn comic book up to this point, as well as several episodes of the animated Spawn TV show that was on HBO right around the same time. So the script was clearly in the hands of someone who knows what makes a good Spawn story and understood the world, character, and tone. As for the casting of our main man,
S to the P to the A to the 1, S to the P to the A to the 1.
There were several other actors considered, like Wesley Snipes, Cuba Gooding Jr., Snoop Dogg, Tony Todd, and Denzel Washington. But of course, it would ultimately go to Michael Jai White, who really identified the tragic nature of the character, and I think you can really tell in the way that White plays him that he understood that the tragic elements of the role were the key to the whole thing. As for Leguizamo, I really couldn't find any other actors who were considered for the role, but I mean, who else could have done this performance? Truly only Leguizamo, and it's still kind kind of crazy to me that he gets top billing for the movie, but realistically, without him, there is no movie. Martin Sheen also had a fun casting story. When his grandson found out he'd been cast in the movie, he apparently freaked out and was super excited. And on August 13th, 1996, Spawn went into production with a budget of $20 million, but this would eventually be bumped up to about $45 million before the movie would finish with post-production and be released into theaters. Filming primarily took place in Los Angeles, and poor Michael Jai White and John Leguizamo had to endure hours of makeup before filming each day. White's was about 4 hours and Leguizamo started at 8 hours, but was eventually brought down to 4 hours by the time production was finished. Leguizamo also had the distinct joy of having to crouch down for all of his scenes because of how short Clown needed to appear on screen.
Have you ever ridden a clown's pink pony? But I think it's about time.
Both actors would also do absolutely insane stunts for the movie. White was set on fire for real for his character's death scene. Actually, in the behind-the-scenes featurette, he talks about getting sprayed down with this flame-retardant gel that's put on ice for 4 days before use, and he was so cold from the gel, he was practically begging to be set on fire in between takes. As for Leguizamo, he actually ate waxworms on this slice of pizza, but he immediately threw up after taking a bite. I mean, you can kind of tell in the final cut when he turns away and they immediately cut to a new shot that something was up. But it's when Spawn entered post-production that the problems really started up, because the amount of visual effects shots increased from the original estimated 77 shots to well over 400. And most of that was due to the confidence the studio had with Deep's experience as a special effects artist. But the thing is, you can kind of tell when you watch this movie now that Deep and his crew were really more interested in seeing what they could accomplish with the budget and time they had, that they didn't really seem to focus much on the story that was in front of them. Michael Jai White has even said in interviews over the years that he saw a first cut of the movie that actually had the story fleshed out and was only missing a few special effects shots, and that the movie he saw at the premiere was completely different than that initial cut. The MPA also slapped Spawn with an R rating, and so there were some minor edits made to get it down to PG-13. That being said, I actually watched both the theatrical and director's cuts when working on this video, and I truly could not tell you what the difference was between the two cuts. They felt virtually identical to me. And finally, on August 1st, 1997, Spawn was released into theaters, and on its opening weekend, it placed second at the box office behind Air Force One and made $19.7 million against its $45 million budget. Unfortunately, its opening weekend would be its best performance, and Spawn would go on to make a worldwide total of $87.9 million, making it a minor success for the studio, although I have to imagine they were all very disappointed that it wouldn't cross the $100 million mark. There's also the fact that neither critics nor audiences were particularly receptive of the movie, with pretty much everyone pointing to the fact that the movie seemed more interested in effects than it did telling a coherent story. Although, ironically enough, noted villain of my commenters Roger Ebert did actually like Spawn and even gave it 3.5 out of 4 stars, which is both hilarious and absolutely insane in retrospect. Apologies for interrupting, but I wanted to jump in and just give you all a quick reminder that Born to Rant is a completely independent channel, and I use absolutely no AI in the making of my videos, and if that means anything to you at all, I would really appreciate it if you'd like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps me out more than you could possibly know. And with all of that out of the way, I think it's time for us to dive deep into everything that makes Spawn still worth watching almost 30 years later. Honestly, if we're talking about what makes Spawn special and different than other comic book movies, it boils down to it's not trying to be anything other than a Spawn movie. It's dark and gritty and gross and doesn't take itself too seriously, but also, for the most part, Michael Jai White is playing Al Simmons as a fully tragic character. This movie also really does a great job of capturing the essence of 90s cool to its very core. Even the opening narration from Cagliostro setting up the Devil's plan to recruit evil men to form his own army kind of reminds me of how Buffy the Vampire Slayer used to start their episodes.
She alone will stand against the vampires, the demons, and the forces of darkness. She is the Slayer.
Actually, speaking of Buffy, shout out to Robia Scott, aka Miss Calendar from Buffy, who pops up in this movie as a news reporter. There are a couple moments early on in the movie where White feels bizarrely stiff, specifically in the car with Terry.
What do you mean?
And the way he just shows up and quits his job and isn't thrown off in the slightest when Sheen's Jason Wynn is like,
I'll arrange for your transfer right after we've run this last operation. North Korean refinery secretly producing bio.
But overall, I think White was a really strong choice for Simmons, and it's a really big bummer that it feels like a lot of his more emotional scenes ended up on the cutting room floor. I also think that Martin Sheen and Melinda Clarke are so much fun as Wynn and Priest. Sheen's performance is so hammy and fun, and I love his black clove cigarettes that he's always smoking. And I mean, is there anyone better at playing an evil bitch than Melinda Clarke?
This town's only really big enough for one manipulative bitch.
We stand Julie Cooper on this channel, but for real, I unironically love the OC. Let me know if you guys want a video on that show eventually. But obviously, the standout performance in this movie comes from the one and only John Leguizamo as Clown/Violator. And I mean, this performance is just on another level. It's a full transformation. Even his stature is completely different. And Clown really does end up providing a lot of the best stuff in this movie, just by being absolutely disgusting at every turn. From his introduction of him smoking a cigar and telling Wynn that Simmons has to die, and snapping when Wynn asks why.
Why? Ask why? When how is so much more fun.
And then him sharding himself when he greets Al after he wakes up. And like I said, my guy actually ate these worms. Truly, this is a once-in-a-lifetime performance, and I'll be curious to see who ends up getting this role whenever the next Spawn movie actually gets made. But performances aside, it really is the overall look and vibe of the movie that really make it stand out. Honestly, it helps that this movie was shot by the one and only Guillermo Navarro, who's had a very long and impressive career, but for me, the highlight is his work with Guillermo del Toro, especially on Pan's Labyrinth. And while the cinematography found in Spawn might not be as beautiful as that movie, it honestly looks 100 times better than it has any right to. Like, I genuinely believe that this movie looks better than any other comic book movie released in the last 5 years, except for the Batman, and even then, it's kinda close. We also have to talk about how silly and awesome Hell is portrayed in this movie. It kind of feels like an elevated PS1 cutscene. I especially love the touch of the devil's mouth not moving when he talks. The director claims that this was done to make it seem like he spoke through Hell itself, but let's be realistic. It was definitely just cheaper for them to not animate the mouth, and I'm sure this was just an easy cut to make in favor of spending the money on a different visual effects shot. As for the big sequences in the movie that really stand out, that's obviously the death of Al Simmons. Again, shout out to Michael Jai White for actually getting set on fire here. It looks really cool, plus I love the dramatic Wanda! I also really like Al dragging himself back to his old house, but does it feel weird to anyone else that Wanda would still be living at the same house, or just me? But I love the way that Spaz recognizes Al immediately and goes to him. It's just very sweet. But the best sequence, hands down in the movie, is when Spawn takes his suit out for the first time and tries to kill Jason at this big party. I think it's the most fun and thrilling sequence in the entire movie. Like when Al gets shot and heals and he says,
damn.
Plus, his showdown with Priest is also great, although I do think it was a mistake to kill her off so quickly. It's also cool as hell when Spawn uses his cape to disguise himself as part of the building here. And okay, let's talk about the cape real quick. The cape is obviously a huge part of Spawn's look in the comics, and here it's not used quite to that same extent. And that's just simply because of how expensive the cape was to animate, and the technology was so new that they had trouble rendering it to look realistic. Like when Spawn descends into the reception and it kind of wraps through the crowd, you can really see how bad it looks. Again, I'm reminded of a PS1 cutscene. Spawn and Violator's first showdown is also a huge highlight of the movie for me, and I actually think the transition from Clown to Violator looks pretty solid. Like, you can tell that the visual effects team really knew what they were doing, they just didn't have the time, budget, or technology to quite accomplish all of the things they were going for. But I do give them props for trying, even though I really do think someone should have taken this movie away from Mark Deep once it went into post-production. The training sequence with Spawn and Cagliostro is probably the most feel-good, fun moment in the movie. Again, it's fun seeing Al get excited about his new powers and have fun with them. The final battle in Hell is a bit of a CGI mess, but it does look very 90s cool, and I love the way that Spawn takes out all the other Spawn with this sick green lightning. And then the final battle with Violator in Wanda's living room is pretty cool too. Like when he puts Spawn's head in his mouth, for a second I kind of was rooting for Violator just just because I wanted to see Spawn get his head bitten off, but of course, Spawn ends up using his powers to take out Violator, and the movie ends with Wynn being arrested for doing all the evil things that CIA directors actually do in real life, but don't get arrested for, and Spawn returns to the streets with a new focus on justice rather than vengeance. And the movie ends with this sick shot of him and his cape on the roof, and it's hands down the best the cape looks throughout the entire movie, and the most classic Spawn image of the movie as well. So, nearly 30 years later, what is the legacy of Spawn? Well, it's one of those movies that if you grew up with, you probably have a real fondness for it, even despite the fact that it never quite comes together.
What do you mean?
Like, this movie really feels like it was made to target 13-year-old boys in 1997 who loved comic books, video games, and/or wrestling, and it nails that aesthetic perfectly. There were originally plans to do 2 more Spawn movies over the next several years, but due to the poor critical performance and middle-of-the-road box office performance, these would end up getting scrapped pretty much immediately. And I think it's no real surprise that since this movie, Mark A.Z. hasn't directed another live-action movie since. He's primarily done straight-to-DVD or straight-to-streaming animated movies over the last couple of decades. Spawn was also the first ever major movie based on a comic book to feature a black main character, which is pretty sick, even beating out Blade, which I feel like often gets credited as the first black superhero movie. And for the past 15 years or so, Todd McFarlane has insisted that another Spawn movie is in the works. Unfortunately, this project has been stuck in development hell off and on for that entire time. As of the writing of this video, the most recent news is that the movie is in development at Blumhouse with Jamie Foxx starring, and Malcolm Spellman, Scott Silver, and friend of the channel, Matt Mixon, working on the screenplay, but the tentative release date for this movie was 2025, and we haven't heard any new information in the last year or so. But let me know in the comments, what do you think of Spawn? Do you agree that it's the epitome of 90s cool? Are you excited for the eventual Spawn reboot? What do you hope to see in an updated take on the story? If you've made it this far into the video, thank you for watching, and as always, a very special thank you to my supporters over on Patreon who really help keep the lights on over here. If you're interested in becoming a patron, there's a link in the description below. Please don't forget that Born to Rant is a completely independent channel, so you liking the video and subscribing to the channel really help me out. And that's going to do it for Born to Rant this week. We'll be back next week with more on your favorite movies from the 90s and 2000s. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.